Hi, my name is Dylan. Hi. Uh, so, 2 weeks ago, we had Bo, who, as we started this series on Jesus coming and becoming a human, which is the incarnation, it means embodiment, to be put into flesh. Bo came and brought us this portrait, this theology of the Bible, showing how God is a God who is near to us, but how that is particularly and beautifully shown in the incarnation of Jesus. And then we had Sage last week who came and talked to us about how the body of Christ was what Jesus came in coming to us, coming to be made flesh. He came to establish. He came to make us the body, the church. And how that's where it's not just Jesus coming in the incarnation, but now he is in the world through his current body, us, made up of many different members and different parts with different people playing different roles, but all the same body of Jesus. And then today we're going to talk about that. Why did Jesus come to establish the body? You know, it's not just that he came and did it, but why did he do it? Why did Jesus build the church? What was the point of the church being built? Because I will say sometimes we'll talk about it kind of like the church is the end goal, but the church is not the end goal. The kingdom of Jesus is where all things are made perfectly right. You know, the form that we have now of gathering together, of listening to the word preached, these are all things that I don't know if they'll be in heaven. We'll be with Jesus himself. The goal of helping to shepherd one another to see Jesus will be complete because we will see him face to face. And so the church in this moment, in this age between when Jesus first came and when he will come again, why is the church here? What's the point of it? There's a story I heard while I was studying this week of a little boy. The little boy came into a church and he saw a plaque on the wall and it said, "For those who died in service." And he looked at the person who was with him and asked, "What service did they die in? Was it the Sunday morning service or the Wednesday night prayer service?" And I think that when we think about service, you know, we understand like those who go off and fight and die in the service. We know what it means when you go to a car place and you get your car serviced. Someone is servicing your car. We know what it is, that service is just like we talked about with Serve Saturday. We go out and we do something for someone else. So why is it that we call this time a worship service? You know, I think about like with a funeral service. You know, there's a funeral that is happening, and the time that you come together is a service that is provided for the family. But when we come in here, when we're coming together for a worship service, I know oftentimes that what we can think about is that the point of the church is just that, is to provide a time for you and me to come together to be served. But I want us to see that service, especially when it's used in the context of the church and God's people, it's not meant to be an inwardly focused thing of how can I be served by the body. You see, even when we come together on Sunday mornings, do you realize that you coming to church is not for you? It is actually for you to come together and to serve one another. It's a time for us to spend here building up, caring for, and serving one another. You see, the thing that I want us to see this morning, we're going to start by reading Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, and we're really going to spend time on that one verse. But Matthew chapter 20, verse 28 says this: "Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." You see, this is in the context of a couple of Jesus' disciples wondering how they could be put in a high position so that others might serve them. And so they're coming, and their mother, Just think about that. Like, these are a bunch of grown men traveling around with the Messiah, and they're like, hey, Mom, can you go ask Jesus if we can, like, but they want to be in these positions of honor. And what Jesus makes clear to them is, look, to seek positions of honor so that others may serve you, that's what the Gentiles do. And he's pointing to the Roman authorities and the people that are in their culture that are being oppressive to Jesus' people. Like, they seek these positions not so that they can make your life better, so they can make themselves better. You know, people seek to be tax collectors like Matthew. Why? Not so that he can make the lives better of the citizens around him, but so that he can add a little extra tax on top of what the government's collecting and enrich his own pockets. Like, this is what they see. Power, position, authority, advantages, positions of privilege. These are all sought so that I can make my own life easier at the cost of yours. And so the sons of Zebedee are coming to Jesus and saying, look, can you put us at the highest position? And Jesus just says, that's not it. In fact, I want you to look at myself. Look at my example. The Son of God, the Prince of Peace, the all-powerful King of the universe, coming down to his creation, and yet I did not come down with trumpets and shouts of armies and kingdoms coming to me to make me their king, but I came down in a manger. Like, I came down, the angels were singing and praising. The wise men come to me. The shepherds come and offer their adoration. But I came down, and I want you to model your life, your service after that. Which is why he says, just as the Son of Man. Just as the Son of Man. Take him as your example of how you're going to conduct your life in this world. If you're going to be my follower, look at the way that I handle who I am. And I think it's incredibly important. And it's for us to do things just as the Son of Man. One thing is we have to know the Son of Man. Like, it's important for us to actually have knowledge of who he is, of how he did things. How did he love people? How did he serve others? What was he willing to give up? What was he willing to cling to? To study him. It's the importance of us looking at the Gospels and who Jesus showed us that he is so that we know him. And so if we don't know Jesus, you and I can't strive to be like Jesus. Do you realize that? If I told you, try to be like John Blankensmith, you couldn't do that unless any of you just happen to know a guy named John Blankensmith. But like, if you don't know that person, you can't be like him. It's in the same way with Jesus. If we are not people who actually know him, we can't strive to be just as he was. We'll fill that in. We may even use the name Jesus. Here's the thing. There are a whole lot of people that say, I'm a Christian and I want to be like Jesus, and they have very little knowledge of who Jesus actually was. They fill that in with what other people around them kind of accept about Jesus to be true. They fill that in with things that they want to be true. They fill it in with all manner of things, but it may not actually be Jesus. You see, the goal is not to be like someone we call Jesus. The goal is to be like the Son of Man who is called Jesus. You know, Jesus, it wasn't even just important for us to know who he was, but even when Jesus was here, you know that for him to serve in the way he did, it was also important for him to know who he was. Like, Jesus had to have knowledge of himself. Jesus had to know what his particular calling was. Jesus had to know what his giftings and interest was, what his purpose in life was. He had to know the resources available to him. He had to know what his aspirations to accomplish. Like, he had to know himself. He had to know when he needed time to rest, like when he's napping on a boat and all his disciples are freaking out. He needed to know when he needed time to withdraw, when he needed time to be with people. He needed to know all of these things. And it actually allowed him to serve with boldness. You know that there's interesting stories where people come to Jesus and they want something of him, even good things. And Jesus has the ability to say no. Like, you think about the rich young ruler who comes up to Jesus and says, I just want to follow you. And Jesus, because he was so sure of the heart of a true follower of his, was able to say to that man, if you really want to follow me, go sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and then you can follow me. You know, a Jesus who was just looking for followers and just wanted someone to follow him all the time wouldn't be turning away people. But what we actually see from Jesus is there are many times that he does not accept people coming after him. There's a story, in fact, in John 6 that we studied where Jesus feeds the 5,000. And after he feeds them and they start to have the reaction to it, it says, when the people saw the sign he had done, they said, this truly is the prophet who is to come into the world. And that's true. He is the prophet, and they recognize it. But what do they immediately do? Therefore, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and to take him, that is to seize him and to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. You know, they rightly recognized who he was and the reason he was here, and yet they then come not with the heart of following him as he's revealing himself to be, but they have this other paradigm, this other anticipation of what the promised prophet and Messiah was going to look like, and they're like, Jesus, you're going to come fit our mold for what you're supposed to be. To which Jesus does the costly thing of being willing to let people leave and walk away. He doesn't meet their expectations. He doesn't seek to try to satisfy them so they'll be happy with him. He knows who he is as the Son of God. He knows the will of his Father for him, and so he is committed to that, even when it's going to lead to tens of thousands of people stopping following him. Jesus knew who he was. And it was out of this knowledge of himself that it actually enabled him to serve faithfully to the will that God had for him. And so I think it's important for us to recognize there's two sides of this understanding, just as the Son of Man. One is, it is important for us to know who Jesus is. And one of the reasons for that is because knowledge of who Jesus is often going to be confrontational to you and me. I mean, there's a story in the Chronicles of Narnia where they're talking about Aslan that in this story represents God. And they're talking about him, and one of the characters asks, is he safe? Another replies, no, he is not safe, but he is good. You see, there are times that when you and I come to God, knowledge of God is going to directly contradict something you and I want. Knowledge of who Jesus is going to confront how you handled your neighbor yesterday. Knowledge of who Jesus is going to make you realize that when you passed by that person and you realized it was a chance for you to serve them and you thought that's inconvenient, knowledge of Jesus is going to make you realize how selfish that was in light of who Jesus revealed himself to be. Knowledge of Jesus will confront us. It won't always give us what we want, but it is good. It's the perfect standard of what is good. You see, we often get so lost in our minds where our sin and our desire for things of this world can make us start to just come in and twist our minds in and think, what my desires tell me I need is what I need. What my heart says I should want is what I should want. Whatever I think is right is what should be right. And when we start to see Jesus, who is the perfect Son of God, he confronts that in you and me. And he'll start to help you and I see how we can put blinders up to our sin. We can put blinders up to the consequence of what we're choosing and how it's impacting people around us, how we're not reflecting Christ as we ought to. We can put these blinders on, but when we pick our eyes up and look at the Son of Man, he strips away those blinders and he makes us realize the ways that we are not living according to his ways. And that's hard. But you see, that's what Jesus does. That's why we need to know him. It's because we either have to accept and be content with the reality that we are blind and we don't see as we ought to see. That we are hiding away ourselves because we would rather be stuck in the darkness that we are in, or we have the option of walking out into the light, the revealing rays that are the Son of God, who shows us what you and I were intended to be if we walked perfectly with God. Jesus confronts our image of ourselves, of what a human ought to be, and he offers us an alternative, the one that actually shows us how God intended us to live. But I think that it's not just knowledge of Jesus that's important for us, it's also knowledge of ourself. You see, ultimately, there's two things that we need to strive to learn in this world, and we can't learn one without the other. We need to know God, and we need to know ourselves. And that's often what God does, is the more we know God, he reveals things about who we are to ourselves and helps us to learn that. But you know, Jesus, he knew the will that his Father had for him, but he also knew who he was. He knew limitations. He knew his strengths. He knew his calling. He knew his role that God had brought him on this earth to play for that time. He knew that he wasn't called to grow up in the Jewish system and become a synagogue teacher and become accustomed into the culture of the religious leaders at that time. He knew that he was called to be this traveling preacher who was going to go from town to town and perform miracles and call people back to a knowledge of God. He knew that he wasn't going to be someone in the highest positions of honor that everybody was going to come to and just say, just teach us. He knew he was going to be someone who would often find himself in the wilderness with crowds that would come out so eager because of the miracles he could perform, but then quickly fall away when it cost them something to follow him. He knew the role that he was coming to play, our Savior. And so because he knew who he was called to be, he could draw those boundaries of, that's not who I'm supposed to be. You want me to go be your king, but that's not who I'm supposed to be right now. You want me to go here and heal all of the people in this town, but that's not what I'm supposed to do right now. And brothers and sisters, just as God had a divine design for the man that is Jesus Christ when he walked on this earth, do you realize that he has just as much a divine design for you and I? Like, he has ways that he has made you in particular to serve him. And it's not that you are called to do everything else that every other believer around you does. There are times that he is going to call you to things that only he calls you to. And there are times he's going to call you to things that he calls everybody else around you to. But what is important in this is for you to seek what God's will is for your life. And I will give you a hint. The way that he made you was not a mistake on that. So your interest, your giftings, the skill sets you've learned over your life, the experiences that you have walked through, all of those are things that God himself has orchestrated to shape and mold you to be able to serve him in a unique way. He's not calling you to do everything else that every other believer does. It's like how Sage talked about last week. Not everybody is called to be a teacher. Not everybody is called to work in the children's ministry. Not everybody's called to lead a small group. Not everybody's called to work at the coffee station. Not everybody's called to go out to serve Saturday. Not everybody's called to go out to the CBA. Not everybody's called. That's the thing, is oftentimes we can take the interest that we have in our life and make it this broad paintbrush stroke. Everybody ought to do this. Brothers and sisters, if we only ever did that, here's the reality. If the only service that comes out of our church was Serve Saturday, do you realize that we are failing? Like, it's not even we're doing pretty good, but we could do. We are failing. And the reason for that is because there are many of you who are designed in particular ways that me or Bo or Sage or Toby or Ashley are not designed. And there are people and needs in this community that you are particularly designed by God to be able to lead the charge in meeting those needs. And so if it only comes from a top down of we're going to orchestrate a service project for the church, and that's the only time that we serve as a church, do you realize there are dozens, if not hundreds, of unmet needs around us that we may actually have the people in our church who are equipped to meet those needs, but aren't doing so? And what you are tasked with, what you are called to by God, is to know him so that you may be shaped more into the image of who God is, and to know yourself so that you may know the tools and the giftings and the unique interests that God has given you as an individual so that you may serve and make him known. God did not make mistakes when he designed you. It was intentional, purposeful. It was something that was thought through with the careful mind of our great Creator who made heaven and earth. And he paid particular attention to you, knowing things that you're going to encounter throughout your life. And so you may think, okay, well, we're talking about service. Why would we spend the most part of our time at the beginning talking about the need for us to look introspectively at ourselves? Or why would we do Bible studies? If the goal is to just serve, why would we do Bible studies and gather and study here? Why would we come together on Sunday mornings and study God's Word, or have this time where we listen to a sermon? Why would we do these things? It's kind of like when, you have the college football playoff that's going on right now. And there's that one period that occurs constantly throughout the game. It's one of the most boring parts of sports. It's called the huddle. Like you and I watching a college football game, we're not looking at the huddle and thinking, this is thrilling. It's why they run advertisements. It's why the commentators who seem to be able to talk about nothing as if it's something are constantly right there, discussing, the smallest little details of things. It's why they run replays during the huddle. Because if it was just, imagine all of that cut out and you're sitting there and you watch huddle and then a play that lasts about 5 seconds and then 40 seconds of a huddle. It would be pretty boring to watch. But you realize that 5 seconds of that play could not occur if they didn't have the huddle. The game is not won really in the 5 seconds of play. It's in the huddle. It's in the coaching. It's in the communication that happens between all of those plays, where one side's making one move and the other's trying to counteract that, and they're going back and forth. It's in the huddle where they're planning for the next challenge that they're going to, and then they go out and they do it. And that, brothers and sisters, is why we come together. It's why we come together in small groups. It's why we come together in large groups like this. Is we come together for two things. One is to learn more about who Jesus is, to make him more high and lifted up and exalted and holy and worthy of worship in our eyes, so that we see him more truly with one another. That is the main reason that we come together, to teach one another more about Jesus. And you may say, well, on Sunday mornings, you stand up here and you preach. Like, how's this us teaching one another? I can tell you that this past period of my life where I've been up here preaching, it has not just been my convictions that you have learned from, but there are many of you who have come to me and said, what about this point? What about that? And we've had conversations. And some of you have convinced me you're right, which then made it into sermons and started teaching the church again. Like, this is not just one person teaching. It's why I go to small group. It's why I try to be a part of you guys, so that you're teaching me and I learn from you, and we're shaping one another even in our worship service. But we come here to learn about who Jesus is, and then we come together in small groups so that you can learn about yourself in these small communities, so that we can go serve, so that we can take the gospel out. This is our huddle, but this is not where the game is won. This is where we come together and we make plans and we look forward to how we're going to meet the needs in our community, how we're going to take the gospel of Jesus to those who don't have it yet. This is the huddle, but the game actually occurs when you step out these walls and when you go. Which is why we read the second thing, the Son of Man came not to serve, just as the Son of Man came to serve. You see, Jesus, knowing himself, knowing he's the Son of God, what did he use his position and his authority and his abilities for? It wasn't for him to just come here and have people serve him. But instead, it was a foundation for him to serve those around him, to serve his disciples when he had to correct them when they were thinking wrong things, to serve the people that he came across when he would do miracles and heal sicknesses. This is very contrary to the example of the Gentile leaders. Their position, their authority, their knowledge of who they were, it was all used to make much of themselves. It was not used to serve those around him. But Jesus didn't just come and serve. There's a particular way that he also served. We see that Jesus, just as the Son of Man came to serve, but we also see just as the Son of Man came to give. You see, service is not just about there is a need and a well-intentioned hope that it gets met. Service is about you giving up something for the sake of meeting the need in another. We need to be willing to do that. We need to be willing to give up Saturdays to go to the CBA and help distribute toys to families that are in need so that we can share the gospel with them. And we may say, well, toys, they're just toys. But it's just like John said, God uses the temporary things to give eternal reward. That's exemplified in Jesus. He didn't just stay spirit, divine God from all of time. He became a man with flesh. He had to be in front of us to see us, for us to see him. And then he sacrificed. He gave up things. He would heal people physically who would then go and do exactly the opposite of what he just told them not to do. Like, he would serve people and meet needs for them to all of a sudden miss the point and walk away from him. You think about the example of the 5,000. They come out to listen to him preach. We struggle to go past 12 o'clock on Sunday and stay focused because we're thinking about the buffet down the road. They were in a wilderness with no food. coming out to listen to him. And yet Jesus, I think, just knowing the people that he was serving, said, are we going to feed them? Like, he met physical needs. He met things that you and I have needs for. It's often how he actually calls us to himself. Is it not often through him putting people in our life who represent him, who serve us and care for us, and we know they do, and we start to listen to what they say, and we start to hear the voice of Jesus that comes out of their lips as they tell the gospel to us, as they point us to him. You know, this is the reality of being human, is that we have needs, and that God didn't make us to be independent. He made us to serve and to care for one another. It's how we show that we actually believe the same thing as God about humanity when we're willing to meet the needs and care for someone who we've never met, simply because they're made in his image. Simply because God took so much care to craft them and to make them and to give them life. And if he deemed them worthy of that, and then also if he deemed them worthy of coming down and dying so that they may know him, how could we consider them unworthy of something as simple as one afternoon? A couple of dollars out of our wallet. You see, James 2, starting in verse 14, says this: what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Can such a faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothes and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, stay warm, be well fed, but you don't give him what the body needs, what good is it? The question he's asking there is, look, if you say, oh, I have good intentions, I want them to be well fed, but my football game's about to come on. What good is that? The intention doesn't show that you actually care for them. It's the action of actually serving someone, actually sacrificing, actually giving something away. And you may say, well, how much is too much? I mean, because this could go to an extreme, Dylan. Well, yeah, it really can. Because this is what it also says. Just as the Son of Man came to give his life. If you want to know the extreme that this can go to, the example that Jesus gave you and I of what he did for us is he was willing to give away his very life for us. He's not grumbling and complaining for a few denarii. This is the Lord of all, who was willing to hang and die so that you and I may know him. You see, he came and he gave his life. He didn't withhold anything. It's even demonstrated in the heart of the Father, where Romans tells us, if he didn't even withhold his own Son for us, what will he not give us? The answer is nothing. That's the heart of our God, a God that's willing to be generous and to give out of his generosity. And you know what's amazing? Is that the people who are generous are oftentimes the people who seem to never go without. But the people who are greedy are often the ones who never have enough. And our God was willing to give everything for you and me. Like for you, individually. He was willing to give it all so that we may know him, so that we may experience the life that comes from knowing him, so that you and I may become these life-giving people that actually go into other communities and other places where God has designed us to go so that people may see Jesus through you, may know Jesus through you. But he didn't even withhold that. But why did he do this? Because it's not just a question of, do we serve? You know, I can I've heard about organizations that go around the world to do missions, and they go and they never share the gospel and they never talk about Jesus. They go to serve. And while I think that I would rather have organizations like that than not have them. I would rather have humanity serving and caring for one another than not having that. But the heart of Jesus wasn't just serve for the sake of serving. We read, just as the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus came and served, and he gave his life to redeem people to himself. Like when you take that coupon and you go to a store or somebody gives you a gift card for Christmas and you go and you redeem it and you actually get what you want from it. Well, guess what? Jesus came to redeem, to get what he wants, ultimately, which was you. He didn't come to serve just for the sake of serving. He didn't come to give just for the sake of giving. He came to serve and to give so that you would be with him and he would have you. He came for you. Like, we rush past that and we can sometimes forget the intentional individual love that Jesus has for each one of us. But do you realize that all that we talk about, like with relationships and knowing one another and caring for each other and being in community with each other, all of these things are things that we talk about because Jesus exemplified them. Because they reflect the heart of our God. He's called us to himself because of his care for us. And he designed you and he made you so that you would take the gospel in a unique way to those who are not yet with him, so that they come to him as well. So that he may know them and love them and have them with him as well. So why do we go? For example, like with the CBA, we give away toys, yes, but we also get to have very intentional conversations with all of them about who Jesus is. The greatest gift that God has ever given us, to try to compel them. We are giving you these gifts, but the greatest thing that we can give you is Jesus. And in fact, it's because we have Jesus that we're even motivated to be out here and serve you in this way. Because we want to give and want to bless and want to meet needs in our community so that you may know him as well. You see, there's another passage that actually says for the Son of Man, and it's very similar language, but in Luke 19:10 it says this, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. This is the heart of our God. To seek and to save. You know, to seek something, it's like when you play hide and seek. I don't know if you realize this, but the ones who are hiding are not doing the seeking. And when Jesus comes to seek the lost, it's not because they're looking for him. He's going out to seek those who are so absorbed in this world and the brokenness of it that they are fearful and they are hiding away and they're just trying to make it by and survive. And Jesus comes into it uninvited, because we didn't invite him down, but there wasn't really any stopping him either. But he came to us to seek us, to come and find us in our brokenness, in our shame, in our guilt, to seek those who were lost in the sin of this world so that they may know him. And so, brothers and sisters, what does the coming of Jesus down to earth to be a human, the incarnation, teach us about service in our community? Well, if we are not serving individually, we are not reflecting Jesus. Like, Jesus and the church is not a place for you to come and to be filled up so that you can do what you want to throughout the week. This is the huddle where the team comes together to to say, hey, you were too far out. You were out of position. Hey, great job blocking that defender. Hey, that was an awesome throw. Maybe you could use a little bit of like coaching on throwing the ball. Like, we come together to refine, to shape, to build up one another, to encourage one another, to care for one another, so that we can go actually play the game, which is of going out and taking the gospel to those who are lost, just like our Savior did for us, so that we can reflect his heart for you and for me, to seek those who are lost, that we may lead them to salvation in Jesus. And then we invite them in here to come in with a holy purpose of knowing God more and knowing themselves more, so that they may find that way that they can fit into God's plan of reaching and saving more people. And brothers and sisters, I can promise you this. When we get to heaven, the trophies and the trinkets, so to say, that we're going to rejoice in, it's not going to have anything to do with most of what we do with our time. Whether it's watching a game, reading a book, whatever the case may be. It is going to be those people made in God's image who are standing alongside us because you are faithful to the way God made you, of taking the gospel and serving those around you and leading them to know Jesus. Like, we will spend an eternity rejoicing over the souls who stand beside us, worshiping the King of Kings around the throne of grace, that we got to play a role in actually leading to be there. That's what we're called to serve for. I talked with Bo this upcoming year. One thing that I really wanted to encourage, and we're going to push for, is every small group that we have taking ownership of some kind of service relationship in our community. So I've mentioned that a couple of times, but small group leaders, this isn't going to stop being said. Like, I want you guys to start thinking about what partnerships we have or what partnerships we may not have that you want to take ownership of. Going out and coordinating with, to serve at, to build relationships with, to share the gospel at, to do this on a small group basis. Because let me just give you one example. We have roughly 10, 12 small groups somewhere in there that meet throughout the week. Do you realize that if we do service projects where we do a Serve Saturday, which is a really good thing, but if we do Serve Saturday every Saturday, we will have 12 service projects in a year. Do you realize if every small group served some organization that you can serve, and you organized it with your small group to serve once a month, we would have 144 service projects throughout the year where we're serving in our community? Like, that's how exponentially it grows if we do this, even just on a small group level. Like, and then if you take it where you and your family are doing something, the idea is this: serving our community needs to become something that is ingrained in our DNA as a church, so that we may look like the heart of Christ and take the gospel to those who are lost. So if you do have some way that you want to serve, some partnership that you think that we could develop, I want to encourage you, first off, be ready to own that partnership if you come and talk to me. Because it's not, can 12 different groups think of 12 projects that I have to manage? It's, can you think of projects where God has specifically designed you to serve, and then I want to put my backing behind you and help that flourish? And so think about that. That's really what I want us to spend, even just at this time as we close up. Think about that. Pray and ask God how He would have you to serve this community so that others may know Him. What are needs in this community that you are specifically gifted to be able to meet? And then let us help you, me, Bo, Toby, help you find where you can put that to use. Father, you have displayed your heart to us in coming to serve us. I just want to ask you, make that something that just becomes the heartbeat of our hearts to reflect you, to serve those around us, to care for those around us, that this world may know you and hear your gospel. Lord, make us impactful in this community, that we change the lives of people around us, both physically, that we would just bring up the well-being of those that we encounter, that they would have healthier and better lives. But help us also to introduce them to Jesus, who heals the heart and the soul. And in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Stand as we sing.